Hello and welcome to Season 2, Episode 7 of The Dive. I am Jat, joined by Kobe and Azael, and this week we have a special guest from Riot's design team. You worked specifically on the AP item changes, but also on the general patch, for patch 8.4, which we're going to chat a lot about today. Welcome to the show. First question, what is your Riot name?
My Riot name is Fruxon, so...
The second question, why did you pick such a terrible name? I played Rumble with this kid, and no one on our team could even say it.
Yeah, well, long story, but basically when I was 8 years old, a very young age, there was this Frozen Throne poster, and I used to go play RuneScape with my friend who lived across the road.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, I need to make a name, a handle for myself. And I was like, oh man, this Frozen Throne poster looks pretty cool. There's like a picture of Arthas on it. And then I was just like, maybe I'll make a Frozon.
And you never decided to change it.
Yeah, I mean, like...
You're Riot, you could be anything.
Well...
You could have any name in the world.
You know...
You could be Riot Matt.
8-year-old me is best me. 8-year-old creativity.
I'm going to call you Matt.
Yeah.
In this episode.
Matt works good.
Okay, first off, just can you give us a quick description of kind of what you do at Riot and what your contribution was to the patch 8.4 here?
So I work on the live gameplay team, so it's like we do primarily balance in the past, but nowadays we kind of own all of the content that gets released and put into the game. So after it's released, we kind of own it from that point. So nowadays we tend to do more like systems changes and more balance work, and some mini reworks and those kinds of things belong to us. So it's like...
Matt's put some good ones out.
Yeah, I've definitely put some good ones in. Top Lane Fizz was when I was an intern back in 2015.
You were the reason for Top Lane?
Yeah, that was
Dash
old, uninformed me, not really knowing what I was doing. But I think I'm much better now, so yeah.
Sweet. All right, well, 8.4 obviously is going to be the thing on, I think, a lot of people's minds. Yeah. There's been already a ton of kind of speculation about this patch and implications of the patch. I mean, we were looking at the patch notes. It's enormous. Like,
it literally just got released.
Yeah, we're recording this Wednesday morning. It's 11:19 right now. The patch notes were released 18 minutes ago. So, like, we did know like some of the patch things that we're going to talk about beforehand, but we're reacting pretty much at the same time as all the community is on this thing.
It feels like a new season.
Yeah, exactly. that's what I was going to say. I mean, the patch is enormous, and there's been a lot of talk about, we don't want to disrupt competitive play. We're going to save the fatty patches for mid-season, preseason, etc. Reading this patch notes, it looks like it's a preseason change or like a mid-season change.
It's huge, dude.
Everything has changed. There's so many champion changes. There's systematic changes. There's item reworks. There's everything. Why, right? Like, why everything right now?
So, like, ultimately, from our perspective, it's like we want to put out the most value that we can. Mainly we ideally want to balance for competitive and for normal players. So it's like, if there's something that's plaguing live for the past, several months or like even, a few weeks, we want to put it out. Yeah, Zoe. We want to put that shit out fast, right? And we also want to be respectful to the competitive players, right? Like, these people are playing for their livelihoods ultimately. And so what we've ended up doing this year in terms of like patch structure is like we have the big patches and we have the small patches. So the big patches, for people that don't know, are on the even numbers. So 8.4, this is a big patch. 8.3 generally is pretty light. So 8.3 last patch was pretty light. 8.1 was very light. And so we have a lot more time to kind of make sure that we want to try and make sure that the things land in a reasonable balanced spot when we do put them out in the big patch. And also we've kind of started up some esports like communication initiatives. We have an esports guy embedded on our team who kind of talks to analysts and coaches. He has a like global network of analysts and coaches, so he can send them out, we're removing Tracker's knife ahead of time. So it's like...
how far ahead of time can you talk about that stuff?
So pretty much as soon as we made the decision that we were going to do it, it was just like, he's just like in his channel kind of talking to them. I remember, some teams are like, oh, man, I hate that you're removing Tracker's knife. And some teams are like, man, I love that you're removing Tracker's knife because, like, some people don't want to award, right? So it's like, ideally, we want to get to a spot where we can do these larger changes and be able to give pro teams, like, a lot of heads up once, changes have been locked down, essentially.
Was this one in part so big because there's been a lot of kind of negative community reactions to the meta currently? Has that affected it at all? It kind of feels like this one, maybe one change opened up the floodgates and everyone was like, all right, getting my change in too, getting my change in 8.4 too. Because like you said, you don't want to interrupt pro play and we don't want to get like closer to playoffs or whatever. So I assume you just want to get as much of the big ones in now so you have time to correct for pros?
Yeah, so pretty much one of the pushes for putting AP items in 8.4 especially is because we don't want to drop them on 8.6. It's like, oh, well, it feels kind of shitty if you're getting AP items, dropped on playoffs patch. So we want to push them out, and then we have time. We have 2 patches to pretty much nail down the balance. Like, we think we've got it okay currently, but obviously that stuff can still improve. There might be like some broken combos that we might need to sort out before playoffs patch hits. But ultimately, yeah. I think it was also like a conflux of, everyone's got some projects that they've been working on long term, and they all just happen to like sync up, and we just kind of all drop them in together, and it's like, oh,
yeah,
geez, like
that's one thing. Like, I'm reading through this patch. There's Tracker's Knife. There's AP items. How many of these are like pro facing versus solo queue facing? Because it feels like the Baron and Dragon stuff that is different, and the Tracker's Knife removal are very pro facing, but like.
Even some of the champion changes feel
But what
like
about like the AP items? Is that more of a general player thing, or is that also pro facing?
Yeah, I mean, AP items is something that players have really been asking for a long time. People don't really like building Morellos into Leandries into Void, as far as I can tell. And it's like, some players do and some players don't, but I think the majority of players don't. And so it's something that, we thought would deliver value to players and also to pros, right? Like, we can see how builds change when esports comes out, right? And it's like, oh, well, maybe this person got, GLP and this person got Ludens or whatever.
All right. Well, let's start at the beginning then, because some of the biggest complaints about the current meta were around the length of especially pro games. And some of the big changes that we see right in here are immediately Baron and Elder Dragon. Those have to be the ones that to affect the game length, because they're simply making the buff stronger later in the game. Can you explain a little bit about why did you choose these 2 levers as far as kind of game length changes?
I mean, ultimately, epic monsters power, I guess, power levers that are very clear and apparent to players, and they're very clear and apparent to viewers as well. And also, like, when you're doing it in a broadcast, it's like, oh, wow, they took the Elder, they took the second Elder, that's probably going to be game ending, and it's like a good narrative to build on, as well as understandable for the viewer. We're expecting it to be pretty game ending when you do end up getting those late buffs. And typically what we've seen previously is like, hey, you get these games where taking late objectives just doesn't really do anything in terms of ending the game. I mean, it does like some marginal advantage, but in terms of like actually being able to break down the base, we felt that these buffs needed to be stronger, especially later in the game.
How, like, just a question for everyone. I'm kind of looking at the Elder Dragon buff. I was thinking a lot about, like, it's very obvious what the intention is. It's helping you close out games.
Let's read through what is actually changing too, because like the patch notes are so long and they just came out.
So, I mean, the Elder Dragon respawn is going down to 8 minutes. Essentially, the buff duration is 150 seconds for the first buff, 300 seconds for the subsequent buffs.
Yeah.
And it goes from 45 plus 45 for each Drake to 135 plus 90 per Drake kill for subsequent buffs, and then it's 50% effectiveness amp on the first one you kill for each Drake, and then to 100% for the
So
second
if it's
kill.
a triple Infernal and then you get an Elder, you basically have 6 Infernal Dragons worth of power.
Plus
you get the second Elder.
In addition to this giant burn damage
Plus, like,
that you're
triple
also
the burn.
going to have.
Yeah.
And so
People going to die.
exactly. So when I was looking at this, I'm kind of thinking to myself, well, yeah, definitely Elder wasn't always the most impactful. But if that like 0, did we go all the way to 100? You know what I mean? Like, at what point does me killing the second Elder Dragon buff just let me pick up the delete button and I press this and their base explodes?
Or
and
does
I
it
win the
backfire,
game, right?
Like it's supposed to speed up games, but you're not going to get the second Elder Dragon until at least, 44 minutes into the game? Do you now just try and get to 44 minutes and pick up the second Elder?
Is it okay if it's just a guaranteed win if you get that, right? Like, speaking about narrative, obviously it makes it more important, but if it comes down to like this 50-50 dragon steal and they get that, like, is that okay that they just automatically win the game? Like, I don't know. And maybe it's not at that point, right? But it just seemed like such a crazy increase.
Well, the first thing is it jumps out that, okay, they're not going to be sitting inside their bases late game anymore. If there's a second Elder Dragon buff up,
get your ass out there.
Instead of, let's all just turtle inside, maybe we can win our last stand at our Nexus. Now it's, okay, let's go out there and try and win our last stand. But I guess it's changing the location of where you want to make your last stand.
Well, and I just really hope that it's not, okay, turtle inside your base with Kalista, Nunu, Azir, and then when it's going to spawn, then you go out and you don't go out for anything else, right? Like you go out for each Elder, and you turtle until Baron spawns, and then you try to start stacking Barons. Like I don't think it's going to be that, but I'm hoping it's not.
Yeah, I mean,
Matt, since you did work, you like tested these changes as well. How do you feel like it's going to...
I think, well, generally speaking, like this dragon stacking mechanic that Elder Dragon has on it kind of contributes to teams wanting to fight for the dragons earlier in the game. And so typically, like, this is pretty much... I doubt it would get to a situation where it's like, hey, this team took 6 Elders, then the other one... It took 6 normal dragons, right? And then the other team, like, just randomly stole one and then they win. Because, I mean, the way that the math works out is, like, the dragon is not that powerful when you do take it. And you've probably sacked a first Elder at that point as well, right? So it's like, in the miraculous case that you do have this like insane turtling scaling comp and you do give away 1 Elder and then you steal the second one miraculously, it's like, that seems like a pretty low chance to me. And I don't think we've seen it bear out.
It seems like it'd be hard to win the fight to even be able to get that prize.
Yeah. So that's like pretty much the intention, like partially the intention of the like stacking buff mechanic, because you get, additional bonus for taking previous dragons, right? So there is some protection there.
Yeah, talking about Baron a little bit as well, one thing I noticed is the bonus stats early on, attack damage-wise, are pretty much the same. It used to give 25 attack damage and ability power. Now it gives 24 attack damage and 40 ability power. And then it scales up more aggressively by, 27 minutes, 30 seconds to 48 attack damage and 80 ability power at 40 minutes. So this is meant to accelerate the end of the game. And there's also some minion buff changes where they're harder to kill. Just what are the high-level goals there?
So I think the minion buff changes are probably more important than the buff in a lot of cases, particularly because the champions that you take to repel Baron sieges, they essentially just one-shot the casters when they're firing at the turrets. And so we want to add in some protection for that. Previously, only the melee minions get the damage reduction. And so essentially, the whole point of the Baron buff is that it provides you this like buffer to be able to attack the turret, especially for like melee champs or to zone people off the turret. So I think that's more impactful than the actual raw combat stats. Obviously, if you're like split pushing and you have the combat stats, like those are meant to be more powerful for you. And also it's meant to give some kind of team fight power, but I would say the primary use of the Baron is to help you in sieges, while Elder is meant to help you in terms of combat power. So it's like kind of informs which epics you're wanting to prioritize.
How, in testing, how much more difficult was it to actually defend this? Because while I was kind of talking more theoretical with stalling for Elder and stuff, stalling for Baron, like waiting and then only fighting for Baron, seems pretty reasonable if it's really hard to defend. Especially, everyone saw the videos of the Baron plus cannon minion with the banner of command, and obviously that was a bugged interaction. Okay, well, Kobe didn't see that, but I mean, that was a video of a cannon with Baron and banner like 5-shotting a turret. Yeah. But that was bugged, so it was doing too much damage. But like, how tough was it to defend? Because to me, it kind of sounds somewhat reasonable to like play passively and then go for Baron if it is this tough to defend, right? With banners, with Zerats, with these sorts of things, if you can just get a ton of gold off that one objective.
I mean, I would say in general, it's like pretty easy to defend, like currently, I would say, just because the way we have changed minions over the years is like melee minions are meant to be the tanky guys and the casters are meant to be the damage dealers. And so it's like, okay, well, let's say if it's too risky for the AD to walk up, like Orianna can zone really hard with Ball, or like Azir can zone really hard with Soldier Threat, then it's like, you might have the melee minion buffer there, but it really doesn't help you that much if the casters aren't really damaging them. So in terms of that, I think it's like pretty easy to defend on live, and it's going to make it way harder to defend.
Yeah. I think for me, an ideal curve for the game would be that the early game matters enough as far as you can have an early game oriented team to try and gain power so that the other team, even if they are centered around Baron or pushing something like that, the early game team has the ability to be too strong by 20 minutes even as far as being able to win a team fight or being able to have enough map control gained from the early advantage that it makes things like that more difficult than what you're talking about, just kind of waiting for Baron or whatever and going for that. So then that's kind of where you could get multiple strategies, which everyone wants, and multiple stages of the game being important. Of course, it's always like that's the goal, right? So tinkering certainly to that point.
Yeah.
I'm also kind of curious, so I'm looking at these notes and I'm seeing, so the Baron buff for AD is much more similar than it was for AP, and then Death Cap also got buffed. I'm kind of curious, do you guys think it's actually going to have any effect, real effect on how much more powerful mages can be late game? Because theoretically in a 40-minute Baron, you're getting 80 AP instead of 40 AP, and then Death Cap is also giving you 5% more additional AP. Like, do you guys think that would actually, change that much as far as like the late game dynamics? Because right now it is kind of 80 carries reign supreme with a potential extra like 50, 60, 70 AP or whatever. Like, I don't know. Does that throw off any dynamics?
Yeah. I think it should, but we could even just move on to the AP items in that case because you guys did a lot. My first read on the AP items here was like Morellonomicon. You take the Lost Chapter, you split it into 3 items, and then they all have their own separate build paths with different uses. But then you guys also did like Leandry's changes, and you changed the AP value on Void and Death Cap, and added an AP move speed item. Like, why all of the change? Why so much?
I think generally speaking, when we do item changes, they have like a really strict relearning cost, especially like for players that aren't particularly engaged with the game, like play very sporadically. I mean, like 2 years ago when I went back to Fiji, like to a net cafe randomly there, I'm just like looking at the players playing, right? And it's like, oh, if we dump like all of these things, it's like it's really difficult to relearn your habits like repetitively week after week. And it's like, oh well, some players like don't have access to or time to just like digest everything. Right.
Even pros. Huni just recently built Sterix plus Ma in pro play, right? Like some of the best players in the world still aren't up on all the changes.
Sure. And so generally speaking, in terms of item changes or like big systems changes, we want to kind of consolidate all of those relearnings into one kind of package. So it's like, oh, you don't have to relearn which Zeal item to buy.
You're just making the test so big that everyone has to do their homework now on patch notes. Else they're like, none of the items work the way they were supposed to.
Okay, so how does that tie into this? Because there's 3 different Lost Chapter lines now.
So in this particular case, we wanted to split out Morellonomicon to be essentially on live, people would just build Morellonomicon, kind of no real thinking about it. Instead, we wanted to add more like contextual game state choices rather than champion kitbind choices. You can kind of have an analogy to Lichbane. It's like, oh, well, Lichbane you can only really buy on certain champions who have, these really short cooldown spells. Instead, we want to have the situational choices that you take be decided by game state. And generally speaking, like in terms of the Zeal items, let's say you have a inbuilt Hurricane synergy. It's like, well, I mean, at that point, you're not really going to deviate from Hurricane. And so the Luden's GLP Archangel split are really trying to hit that, hey, I build this different item based on the champion I'm playing or playing against, or the jungler I'm playing with, or the jungler I'm playing against, or the team comp I'm playing against. So, for example, let's say you were playing Orianna, because Orianna can take all 3 in any reasonable capacity. And it's like, oh, I'm playing against this, garbage tier laner like Veigar or something. Maybe I want to stack on him with Archangels. Maybe I just want to straight up kill him with GLP. Maybe we have an Elise and we can, gank assist with GLP. Or maybe I can just one-shot him with Ludens or whatever, or just chip him down. Like, those are the kinds of decisions that kind of altered by game state.
So do you think that this has actually achieved that? Because that's something that is talked about a lot but I think is achieved extremely rarely.
Yeah.
I think even with runes, I think, with item choices, every time there's, the defensive item rework, everything is about, oh, okay, well, there's this one situation where you do this, then you do this, but then it's like, oh, well, it turns out for like a year you just built Spear Visage and Iceborne and then Sunfire, right? Because things get figured out. Do you think this is just solvable, or do you think you've actually kind of achieved more of that?
I'm remaining like hopefully optimistic about these. I think that especially for mages which don't have very focused kits, there is actually some choice there. So yeah, I'm like hopefully optimistic.
For me too, a lot of this comes down to players like simplicity. So they'll often just get a build that they like and want to build the same thing over and over, or just wait for someone figure out what's the best, so then I can just build the best build or whatever. A lot of people aren't going to be like, okay, now this is the time to, kind of take advantage of those changes. Right?
I mean, in theory, we saw. Actually, it's funny because in China, it's like, oh, well, you'll, take Uzi's rune page or whatever, and then the ADC will be like, wait, why the hell do I have this demolish thing? It's what? It's like I don't want this thing. Right?
I actually see so many people with the magic resistance in Resolve and stuff like that, because that's what they take every single time, even though they're playing against like a Yasuo or whatever.
Yeah. Ultimately, what we want to build out is kind of, you have this generic purchase, and then you have like small, let's say like the generic purchase gets you like 90% of the way, and then you have small optimizations you can do that, give you the 5% extra bonus, and then that can, compound into, like, generally speaking, League is a game of small advantages, and like you build small advantages into big ones, and it's like, oh, you have these small 5% and you build them into something big, and it's like that's kind of the thing we want to.
It's kind of an interesting question or thought or whatever, because you're talking about like it gets you these small advantages, and this is something I've talked about with you guys and with Freak and with a lot of people, and it's just kind of like the idea of where is your guys' ideal world as far as like how much of an advantage should I get because I took the the armor rune instead of the magic resist rune against Yasuo? How much should I get because I knew to build executioners against a Mundo or a Trundle, right? And that's a discussion I've had a lot, because there are some of these item checks where it just feels like, did you build Grievous Wounds against Mundo? No? Okay, he's OP. Did you? Okay, he's crap, right? And how, like, where's the guideline on that? How much effect do you think that should have on your power in the game?
I think it depends on the type of player that you are too, right? Like,
because I love that stuff. I love optimizing and thinking I'm smarter than you. I built the right thing.
The nerds that make a podcast to talk for an hour about the patch
Who are gonna
want, and the people that listen to it are gonna want items to matter a lot.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas the people that still build Abyssal Scepter when it changes to Abyssal Mask like 3 months later don't want that to be impactful. They just want to be able to style on you with their buttons. So I do like the pregame existing, because that's a big thing that draws me into the game, but I don't want it to overpower everything else. Like I should still need to be good at the game to take advantage of my pre-gaming.
But like
right?
thought exercise, like how much of a percentage like increase in chance to win should it give you, right? If you do it optimally, he's the guy building Abyssal 3 months later after his change. He just wants to press his buttons, it should give you a 10% better chance.
I think the game should be 75% and the pregame should be 25%.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to put an actual
of course. It's just
number to that. But yeah, I definitely I think it's an interesting point, because another complaint that I've seen a lot around, the current meta, with it developing more and more into team fights matter the most. So 5-on-5s have become extremely important. There were a lot of people complaining about, since it's a team game, it matters more if one of my teammates does something so bad, like, the nobody builds Grievous Wounds or whatever, the most optimal user. And then I'm like, oh, well, I'm the support Braum or whatever. I can't build well, I guess I could.
Build executioners falling, baby.
So then that leads
but then you
to
don't have your locket or whatever.
Yeah, the main drawback to team games like this is when
you're dependent on those dummy teammates.
When you get people just put on
like
your
this
team,
guy. Like me,
you have that feeling, right? And everybody can relate to that feeling. So we all laugh about it.
Relate.
But you could be that person on my team.
I could be that dummy.
Yeah.
Matt, do you have an answer to Isaac's question there? Like, how much should pregame knowing your build path versus just being good?
I mean, generally speaking, I think it's a pretty divisive split within design. But my personal opinion is that I think pregame edges should matter in terms of like, hey, I'm optimizing these small edges that multiply on top of each other, and less about, hey, I bought Grievous Wound, I didn't buy Grievous Wound, so my team lost. I think that the game of optimizations versus the game of, hey, hard countery, I think I prefer optimizations in that case, in terms
Good
of like
word choice.
Yeah, in terms of like driving, item and rune decisions. If I took Mirror Shell as Twisted Fate against a Zia Pokey lane or whatever, or like I took Inspiration Resolve because I just wanted to out attrition him and run his mana pool dry. I think that those types of things are good compared to like by execution is
versus
calling
window.
Because you still have to execute on the thing,
versus
right?
right.
It's
You
not
have
like
to-
if
yeah.
I did the thing,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
win. You have to then play
Yeah.
around the choice you make.
I think, generally we like supporting counters, but generally speaking, counters should have some kind of play to them. Obviously, we would want to be able to say, hey, like, Executionist has some play for Mundo, but ultimately, like, we only have so much time, and it's
It
like,
does have has lots. Your play was
Yeah.
not to pick Mundo.
don't get hit by the executionist, dude.
Having said that, it like Mundo's
That's the
kit,
pregame again, Just
yeah.
don't pick the chance.
Maybe Mundo's kit is too brittle and too
Yeah.
like based around his healing, and maybe he should be more about like cleaver throwing in so he doesn't get hard counted by one item.
Yeah, I do want to just really quick touch on the tooltip here because I think it's an important PSA. I was super confused when I first read the tooltip for Luden's Echo
Me too.
and Hextech and Archangel Staff
Yeah.
because there's 10% CDR on the item, and then they have this unique passive that also gives them 10 CDR. So all of the Lost Chapter upgrades give you 20% CDR. It just comes in two parts because if you stack Luden's Echo and Hextech GOP, you'll now have 30% CDR
Right.
instead of 40. So don't be confused that they say 10% twice. It's actually a 20% CDR item.
Yeah.
That's
Ultimately, we want to like
Don't stop.
incentivize as much build diversification if you want it, right? Like if you want a crap load of mana because you're playing Rise or Cassio or whatever, like we want to open that path to you without making it like ludicrously broken so that you only take there's only like there's only a few AP's 20% CDR items in the shop, and so it's like, oh well, due to the way that CDR works in this additive model, it's taking 20%. Once you add 10% and 10% on top of that, each CDR that you add is a greater increase in your costs. So
I'm also still thinking about the strategy diversity in pro play. I don't know if you guys feel the exact same way, but I'm pretty sure most people have felt like for a while, pro play is trending more and more towards the 5-on-5 is the important thing. And so then we get everybody with like mandatory tanks, and you have mandatory specialized DPS champions that are 4 damage over time, and so much of it is revolving around 5-on-5 for pro play. How is that kind of on the balance dashboard there? Do you guys for solo queue? It's probably a lot easier for people to do split push and to have, play assassins. And make use of burst damages. What's kind of the medium between, okay, we're seeing everyone playing tanks, and even in solo queue, people complain, oh yeah, you're just gonna play the 5-on-5 comp or whatever and just group. Where's like the needle maybe between those two, I guess?
I mean, certainly we want to try and incentivize as much strategic diversity as possible in terms of strategies. I guess my counterpoint would be, do we consider like Camille and Gangplank Fiora to be like 5-on-5 teamfight champs, or like is the current top lane?
For me, Camille is a bit of an outlier right now as a champion. A lot of people just think her personal power is super strong, but I would definitely agree.
Especially because flex pick in pro play adds a lot of value.
I would definitely agree. The Camille is like the style of having the split option or whatever. But even then, right now, she's often used with like Galio or something to dive in for the 5-5 and
To turn her into a
Sure, you like alter her properties into being more tanky. I guess when I look at the pro meta, I see like a pretty decent diversity in terms of picks that you can take, and these team strategy. Like, hey, you took GP for team fight, or like, hypothetically, it's like, let's say GP was like used more for his ult and like, kind of barrel team fight play and was less of a split pusher. Like hypothetically, it's like, oh, well, you do take things to counter that kind of style, like in lane. And I think that's like a reasonably healthy like system, in my opinion. But I guess generally, if we can support split push, we would. Having said that, it is quite difficult to support split push just because of how little response that you generally have. And I think teleport plays a big part into this, and we are looking at, kind of changes to teleport and experimental changes to teleport. We've got some things in iteration right now, which are hopefully, addressing this kind of freeze that teleport has on the game in terms of, hey, you take teleport to be the best split pusher and the best team fighter kind of thing. So it's like
yeah. I mean, Kobe, even to your question, I think personally there's always a want to have different end goals be the goal for different teams, right? Like you don't want everyone building towards team fight, and some teams will want to build towards different strategies. But throughout League's history, over time, like it usually trends towards the same thing, right? You'll trend, and right now we feel like we're in the mid lane, shove out and roam, 80 carries take the late game, top laners eventually be able to win the 1v1, but ultimately still be effective at collapsing to team fights. Like that's the game state right now. I mean, this patch in particular, I think has a chance to disrupt that, even if it's just temporary.
There's so many changes,
right? Because there's so many changes.
And I mean, like to your top lane point, I think a lot of it is like personally less about playstyle and more about certain champions being too strong right now, and that's why it's like exactly, and we'll talk about that more in the champion section. But I mean, Gnar, GP, Ornn are massive as far as like representation is in picks, right, compared to some of these other picks, and I don't think it's just about their playstyle; they're just too good, but they are getting nerfed. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about some of the actual specific AP.
Yeah, I want to talk about the new ones.
Yeah, well, and I mean, Leandri's Torment is very interesting to me, but yeah, the two new ones coming out, Oblivion Orb. This is seems like a pretty atypical item because unless I'm misunderstanding, it doesn't actually build anything.
It builds into Morellonomicon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
My mistake.
Yeah.
I was just looking at the actual Oblivion Orb thing in the tooltip. Yeah. Say that, and then Spellbinder coming out as well, which is something I know Jat is super excited about.
Yeah. So let's just start with Spellbinder.
Yep.
Because this is 2,800 gold, 100 AP, 10% movement speed. And then I want a little bit more clarity of exactly how the passive works, because nearby allied and any spellcast charge up Spellbinder. So is an enemy or allied spellcast count as 1, count as 5, count as 10? Like how quick does it
so each spellcast counts as 1.
So it's 100 spellcasts.
Yeah.
Right.
And so the intention for this item is when you're fighting a lot, or when you're playing against people or playing with people that cast a lot of spells, this thing is going to be useful, and it's not going to be so useful when you're kind of split pushing the side lane.
Get Sona on your team.
My immediate thought when I saw this item was Vladimir, Katarina, literally any monolith assassin who wants to one-shot you.
Yep.
Like, I imagine that happened in testing.
Yep.
Is it busted? Like, what are your read on this item release date?
Generally speaking, I think Spellbinder fights pretty hard against the typical items that you would buy in that slot. For example, Gunblade or Protobelt. And I think generally speaking, I think it's relatively well balanced against those. Yeah.
What about in combination with, right? Like when we're talking about like actual like assassination potential, to Jat's point, like, there's the world in which this Katarina builds Gunblade Ludens or whatever and Spellbinder, right?
Yeah.
Is that like, does it get to like the feeling like Rengar point where it's just like, oh, I instantly die?
Yeah, potentially. I think generally speaking for the item system, like we want to gate a lot of item purchases behind opportunity cost. It's like, oh, well, did your Vlad like not buy Zonya's kind of thing, or did your Vlad not buy Leandri's or whatever? Is that, or Banshees, like, is that a meaningful detraction from when you could have bought Spellbinder? Or so I think generally speaking, I hope it holds up in terms of opportunity cost gating is mainly the one there. But I could see a world where you just stack a whole bunch of these like base damage increases and then just go in and pop a dude. But having said that, like Spellbinder has some internal gating mechanics on it. Like Vlad is not exactly the best.
And a Snowball Katarina can already do that.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I have been one shot a time or two.
Yeah, it does kind of seem cool, depending on how in reality the charge up works and like how long
I'm imagining
it takes.
like clown car outside a turret, everyone just spamming circles, like spamming spells in a circle to stack up the item.
Because I mean, what if it's a case where like it's so difficult to build up your Spellbinder that it's cool to have these points where he can choose when to use this big power, but he's had to spend so much time,
Yeah.
collecting his spirit bomb.
Yeah.
And when you shoot your spirit bomb.
Gotta spend 2 episodes going.
Yeah. if it's
Basically.
that long around this outer turret or whatever, they spend 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And then he kills someone, and I'm like over in a side lane far away from Baron, and I'm like the support of something, and I'm like, haha, you used your spellbinder to kill me, noob, or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's so much power gone. Then
Yeah, I don't actually
those are funny.
have a good idea of how long it takes for people to cast
100
spells around me,
spells.
right?
Yeah.
The only thing I have kind of comparable in my mind is I play a fair bit of Castanen and Castanen E, right? Like people,
It's like 6.
but exactly that's 6, right? And in lane it's actually slow.
Yeah.
A lot of the time in team fights I feel like I'm spamming that thing, but again it's 6. It's not.
Yeah.
100.
What's the range?
The range is
spells?
pretty generous. It's like 1500. So generally speaking, we've had around 50 to 60 sacks per minute. So if you're like,
Is that like in laning phase or is
no
it team
after
fight?
after like in the kind of skirmishy.
Huh.
So theoretically, it has a minute cooldown, so you could be like expending it twice as often for like less punch, or like Kobe said,
Right.
charging up the spirit bomb for the big one shot. Or
Yeah, I think the interesting decision point about this
That's
item
kinda
is like, hey, there are variable use cases for it, and it's like, oh well, I used it at 50 stacks and it wasn't like that impactful, but maybe I was forced to use it to escape from a gank or something.
Yeah.
Like, and it's like, oh well, that actually cost them the spellbinder stacks, and you can feel good about like blowing that.
I'm pretty actually interested in Leandrius as well because I always love playing like dot champions, damage over time type stuff, right?
And it's
seems-
changed.
It's
Magic Pen is decoupled. That's now an Oblivion Orb, which moves in Morellonomicon, which is the Magic Pen item. No Magic Pen on Haunting Guys or Leandries. And it instead gives this 2% increase in damage per second up to 10% until exiting combat.
Yep.
and that doesn't say champion combat, so I'm reading that as combat with minions.
No, this is champion combat.
Oh,
yeah.
okay,
It
well-
says damaging champions. so,
okay, yeah, but until exiting.
Generally, well, Leandris was an interesting one. Generally speaking, it usually hovers between a state of like being overpowered or being underpowered, just because flat pen is good against squishies and the burn is good against tanks. So it's like if the item is at all tuned reasonably, it's good against everybody, and so you wouldn't really deviate from going Morello's
This
Leandri's Void.
reads like I want to blast tanks.
Yeah.
Especially with the passive got changed as well. 1% of target's maximum health per second,
Right.
not current health.
Right. So one of the goals with this was to make it more focused and hope that it doesn't break on dot champions. So I think I guess you guys have seen the Mordekaiser ult like one shot thing. Yeah. I mean, it's been nerfed like quite a bit since then, but
I was also immediately concerned about like Malzahar, Singed versus tanks, Malzahar versus tanks, these sorts of champions who want to play that more like slower playstyle anyway.
Yep.
And even some like this is pretty random, but like some of the actual tanks using it as a damaging item, right? Like what about like a Mundo or whatever versus tanks or something like that, or even maybe like a Maokai or whatever, right? Like in a tank versus tank matchup. Did you guys really do much testing for that, or do you guys think it would actually be viable at all?
honestly, we didn't do that much testing on like Mundo or Maokai
I'm
buying it. It's
thinking,
like pretty random.
like-
But we did do some testing with like Fizz. Fizz top buys it, can buy it situationally against tanks, and that has been pretty performant. I'm imagining we'd
Or even
probably
a
need to
cannon, I
change.
guess, right?
Yeah, I'd imagine we'd probably need to change the damage amp to not apply to all your damage and only apply to magic damage at some point, or even change the damage amp like full stop because of how well it stacks with Sock Shoes and the Oblivion Orb Magic Pen. But those are like, we kind of just want to drop it mainly because the damage amp as it exists also amps the burn, so it's like a more understandable, hey, this effect is increasing over time.
Yeah, and real quick, like how much time do you guys actually have to test this stuff, right? Because there's normally like patch 8.3, technically it's the same patch cycle as 8.4 as like testing resources.
Yeah.
So how many playtest games can you really play to get all this stuff in?
Yeah, I mean, Isaac would know, he was on our star top lane playtester.
I was on that team back like 5 or 6 years ago.
yeah,
I know,
and Zyri.
I know there's a
Yeah,
lot
I
of
know,
theory
right.
crafting and
Moving up in
a
the
little bit
world.
of guesswork that goes into it, right?
Yeah, so definitely we have been doing a lot of theory crafting on this. We have done some amount of testing, but I mean, generally speaking, for test procedures, it's like, oh, do we want to do like destructive testing? Like, how much do we want to push push these to like break them, and how much do we want to like fine tune them for balance so that they land on time? Because ultimately it's like, oh well, if you're doing destructive testing, like you're not really going to get that good of a read if you're taking like suboptimal uses, like Mundo throwing cleavers, and it's like, well, is that yeah, it's like, is that a valuable like use of testing resources? Plus there's like all these champions and champion updates in flight, like. So it's generally pretty hard on testing, and so a lot of it has to be done through spreadsheeting and being like, hey, how much damage is Leandri's doing compared to the old one? And
yeah, because Leandri seems like it would probably be fine a lot of the time in mid lane. Like most of the things I'm thinking, oh my god, this could be really abusive, is I'm just immediately thinking of all the top lane cases, right? Like even things like Mundo is obviously way out there, but like Singed is very popular and very high win rate. Teemo is very popular and very high win rate, right? Like those two champions can are already pretty strong into tanks, and like immediately thinking of things like that being pretty rough to actually deal with in lane, and maybe even like a Heimer, right?
I really like that. Like, what if Teemo takes his first item? Like, did you spreadsheet that case at least, or like?
Generally the whole like pattern of the item has been shifted pretty dramatically, because previously the dot is not very effective against you when you're on low health, and now it is. But as a trade-off, it's not as effective at chipping, and so it's like a fundamental like redesign of the item almost. And so, I mean, honestly, we did do whatever due diligence in terms of spreadsheeting, but ultimately 1 day's worth of live is going to tell us more than testing this for a year, right? Like,
I kind of like it just glancing at it, right? As long as I personally walk over a mushroom,
you are the one abusing
I'm
it.
not going to lose half of my
You're
life.
losing less health than before, but it will kill you easier if you're already low.
And to me, the funnier moments are when you're low and you get one of those things, and then you actually die from it. Whereas it's really frustrating if I'm full health, and then I walk on something and I didn't die, but now I can't really fight.
Useless,
you're like, oh well, that's boring. I don't get to play anymore.
I think one of the really, well, I wouldn't say divisive, but one of the points that people brought up is just like, if you get hit by a spell and you're on 400 health, like, do you expect to die off that if the spell did like 200 damage, and that can strike a really weird, like, oh, I escaped, but actually I didn't because I was just burning to death, and that feels really bad. So kind of trying to weigh that against what I would call like focusing of the item, because this has a more clear like, oh, it's actually understandable what it's doing. Like, you just always will want to be considering it when people have high health. Like,
yeah, it's gonna be really interesting. Even I'm thinking Kennen in competitive, because Kennen top is something that gets played in competitive still.
Right.
And something like this into tanks like seems really good for Kennen, right? Who can be like, even though he's auto attacky or whatever, like seems pretty strong. So
I mean, ideally, you're
definitely a lot to think about, which is actually like for me, for my selfish reasons, I think it's exciting because I like thinking about items and doing this stuff and figuring out what's the best, whatever. But
it's fun for us. I feel for the pro teams a little bit right now with like especially back when I was a pro, like this is when Riot was still releasing champions every 2 weeks. It's like a new champion came out. I now have to play a bunch of this champion, understand this champion, know if it's good against, because if I don't, I run the risk of getting slammed by it. And if I just make a quick read that I think it sucks, then it's actually best to like not put any time into it and move on. So I think this is where the regional pockets and the scrim pockets are going to all come to like a lot of different conclusions really early on.
I actually have the complete opposite sentiment here. Like,
you think it's super fun for the pros?
I think not that I don't feel sorry for the pros, because I'm like, okay, well, they're playing all day, every day. This is their job to play. I feel sorry for the people that don't play the game that much, and they just want to play with their friends or whatever. They haven't read, go through all these patch notes, and they didn't spend 2 hours theory crafting before they get into the game. They just pop into the game and they're like, whoa, how do I play now? I don't even know what's going on.
I mean, we're hoping rec items pull some of that weight. Like, and also one of the intentions of putting Ludens in the first slot is you have this understandable, like, one of the reasons why we didn't, for example, we could have changed Leandri's like icon and name and done all this, that, and the other thing, but generally speaking, we're like, oh, Morello's is still the Grievous Wounds item, Leandri's is still the burn max health item, it still does what it does, GLP still does what it does, and then we like updated all the rec items, so hopefully
it's not like Athene's and Abyssal swapping and all that stuff.
They're more
that was pretty confusing.
Yeah,
so many
right.
People are building
Abyssal to Abyssal is like quite confusing.
The one I messed up the most is just when small build path things were changed, like
Oh, yeah.
health crystals to giant spells, or like the cloth armor doesn't build into the right one.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you're left with pieces, and you don't get to like
Right.
finish your sunfire or whatever it was.
I hated that. When I
When
built a
it-
giant spell and I was like, now I'll complete my set.
Yeah.
Now I have to
Yeah.
build Dead Man's Plate.
you're
That's
like-
not what I want.
Yeah.
When Pistol first got changes, I kept building a Negatron cloak and stuff like that, and then it's like, oh shit, it doesn't actually build into this anymore.
Yeah, I know when I changed Frost Queen's claim from Amp Tome, because it used to build out of a codex, right? And
blasting.
we were like, yeah, we changed it to blasting one, and then my girlfriend's just like, wait, I bought this Amp Tome, and now like I have
Yo, Morello's
codex in my
now.
inventory. It's like, well, I guess I gotta get like
Yeah.
other random.
Time to build a
It's like-
Fiendish Codec.
Yeah, it
We're
feels
in
bad.
it. We got to keep moving through
Yeah.
the patch, though. like,
Trackers.
Tracker's Knife.
There's actually so much stuff in this patch.
Yeah,
it's insane.
we probably won't cover all of it, but we're going to cover the things that jump out to us the most. There was a actually pretty big discussion on Reddit, at least, when this first kind of made it to PvE, but we say we're going to talk about Tracker's Knife because it's gone.
Yeah.
You no longer have the Smite upgrade that
Done.
gives you 2 wards. You now just have Challenging or Chilling Smite.
Yeah.
So my first reaction to this was, if you wanted to remove vision, why didn't you go after like zombie ward stuff if this is targeted at pro play? Because if trackers is removed, my first thought was, okay, well, teams are going to offset that by having someone extra hold on to a warding totem or trinket, excuse me.
Yeah.
And that would basically, by removing a warding item, you actually remove a sweeper. So you're removing vision removal, maybe, if people.
It can be hard to have the same people get out there, like on the map and everything, though, too, right?
Yeah.
Like, because you can refill trackers. Like the amount of vision that some people are putting out. Like, obviously, it was zombie ward plus all this, but
I just hate
think
zombie
the-
ward, so that's my personal vendetta.
Yeah, well, and it's like I hate zombie ward too because it's not fun. It doesn't feel fun for me to use, but it's also really good. So I'm like, I should probably take it.
Yeah.
But I mean, Smithy is the game I always think of where you play the game
There's
0, 1,
7
0,
wards in
100
the
wards
pit.
placed in the game.
Yeah.
Which is pretty insane.
I mean, yeah, hitting on the hey, it's powerful but not fun to use is also one of the motivations for like removing it, mainly because hey, it's fine if we have, a champion that's, perma pick banned in pro play if it's like aspirational for the player to hit. Like I always
sure.
use
Riven.
theoretically. I always use Ezreal as an example because it's like,
'Cause it's big.
hey, this is the champ that's picked like a lot. People don't really complain about it that much when they're playing against it, but when Bang plays Ezreal and I'm in a game, I'm like, oh man, I can be like Bang, and I'll try and play Ezreal, and obviously I'll just like die to Robert at level 1, getting first blood in our Rumble finals. But like,
But then we'll win anyway.
but then we'll win anyway because Azael's playing, Maokai top. But like, those kinds of aspirational things that do carry power and are powerful are, in my opinion, better than
Right.
the non-aspirational things that are very powerful and not very satisfying.
Spot,
Yeah.
take zombie ward.
I think it definitely does change a little bit by the person because I know I was talking with some of the other casters, and I even think this personally. Like I take Tracker's Knife 95% of the time in solo queue.
Yeah.
And it is aspirational for me
Red's
to get a
playing
jungle
only
and
jungle.
jump
You wussy.
and ward, yeah,
I am the ward.
yeah,
I'm
I ward the Raptors, I ward the enemy red buff, and then I leave that jungle, and my bot side is okay
Yeah.
because they're not going to get ganked.
But they're not going to watch the mini map.
No.
They're going to die anyway.
Yeah.
So, like, it's kind of funny, but I guess there's the couple of champions where even solo queue people would build Tracker's Knife.
Like
They're not
Albert.
many. It's like Nunu and Sejuani or something like that.
Lee Sin.
These tanks, I feel like those are the only people that are going to be like, dang. Pretty much everybody else is like, great. Now I have my excuse. I'm buying red every single time.
Kobe, have you seen Uncle Jamal's AP News?
I played
jungle?
against him, and
Okay,
he
doesn't
added
go
the
trackers.
after.
Yeah.
Wait,
Blue
his
Smite?
no, what? What are you talking
AP
about?
Nunu.
Oh no! I played against his Renekton jungle. I thought you were
Oh,
talking
okay.
about that.
Sorry,
That's what he's not.
Yeah, this is an aside,
Man, this
but
guy's
Uncle
deep.
Jamal is like this. I feel like he's a troll, but he's really good at the game because he plays Jungle Renekton. He plays AP Jungle Nunu with Challenging Smite and Predator.
Yeah.
And
Hilarious.
he'll go like Runic Echoes, Leandries, which he's going to have to change his build because he needs Magic Pen now. He's going to have to go Morel and Omicron or Oblivion Orb. But he literally Predators up to you, ease you, flashes, and smacks you. And it takes 85% of your health if you're a squishy.
Yeah.
That's
I have played against a Rage Blade building Nunu who did a very similar thing. It wasn't the burst you're talking about, but he was patting me on the back real fast.
Yeah, he's not building
Rage
Tracker's
Blade.
Knife. This is more aspirational for
Yeah.
Nunu.
Very aspirational.
Very-
Okay, sorry, we can get back to Tracker's Knife now.
But yeah, I think generally speaking, like if if you are killing the enemy jungler or like spending a lot of time in the enemy jungle as the jungler and you manage to spot them out, like, I mean, that can be equivalent to like having vision in a lot of cases, right?
So this is a Riot endorsed battle ward. Junglers should all look
Get in there and
right.
feed.
That's right. Get in there.
But I mean, is there no way for junglers to play the vision game anymore? Like, is that just something
Trinket.
that we don't?
Pink ward and trinket, right?
And
That's
here's
Pink Ward and
zombie
Cricket.
ward.
Yeah.
We have
Take the right
essentially
route.
gone in 6 months from junglers having the option between Tracker's Knife and Sightstone. Like,
Yep.
if we still had a buildable Sightstone, guaranteed we're going to see Chilling Smite, Challenging Smite, Sightstone junglers, just
Right.
because of how important it is. But like, it's gone now.
I think generally speaking, we would entertain the idea of having a supportive jungle enchant, like, you know, kind of Tracker's replacement at some point. Obviously, in this case, we just removed it because we don't have the time to, you know, like spin that up and make it. And I think generally speaking, we've shied away more from, hey, this way you're playing the vision game is literally putting down a ward, mainly because, you know, there are more exciting ways and satisfying ways to give vision that also offers some like good amount of play to the opponent. Like, honestly, like when you put down your Tracker's ward, and then the person like comes in and sweeps it or whatever, that's often enough to like, you know, repel their ganks for the next like 2-3 minutes, right? Because you're like, oh, well, I know where they're going to path after that.
4.5
kind of
minutes
thing.
with
Right.
Zombie Ward.
Yeah, sure, exactly, right. And it's like, oh, having said that, it's like, yeah, Zombie Ward, I guess, like, we're not particularly happy with either, but
it's
like,
definitely multiplicative because
Yeah.
if you had Tracker's Knife and Zombie Ward
Yeah,
before,
right.
so you have more wards to place, they pop up more, that sort of thing.
I mean, this one to me, I'm less concerned about solo queue and more concerned about pro play, like the changes, and or think it's at least going to be a bigger impact. And I totally get the frustration of, you know, players like you, Jat, and I know Zyrene is a really big proponent of Tracker's Knife because he plays like almost only Sejuani. It feels like, I think. Like he
Plays, I saw him playing Camille Jungle on
oh, that's
Rek'Sai.
true. That's true. Yeah, yeah.
So,
He does play some other things.
You better
but he-
not be building trackers on them.
well, he like, I mean, from when talking to him, he loves building trackers, regardless, right? You know, that's his style. He feels like, you know, he's maybe not as mechanically strong as some of these other players, but he's high diamond, and he feels like he does it because he controls vision on the map and these sorts of things. And it's frustrating for those players, but most people do not do that. It's like a tiny fraction of players in solo queue who want to do that. But in pro play, it's a different beast because in pro play, whether they want to do it or not, you're going to buy a Tracker's Knife and you're going to be happy about it. You're
Right.
gonna, you know, you're going to suck it up. Otherwise, you're going to get fired.
Dark, you're buying it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because, you know, you said feedback was pretty split. Some of the people are going to be like very, very happy about it. Some of them are going to be frustrated about it. But either way, it's a big change, right? And how much, I'm kind of curious, do you guys think it will actually change pro play, and in which way? Because I've heard very different sides of it. I've heard people saying, oh, it's going to make people play even more passively because they won't have the information to do stuff. And then other people are like, well, no, of course you have to invade with the red smite and kill them.
Yeah. No, I certainly think like there are incentives to play aggressively, like trading. If you just concede everything, you know, like, oh, it's too risky to do anything, like that's just going to be exploited by players that play aggressively, right? Like Fake is going to, you know, kind of play aggressively, evade the ganks, like because of his instinct. And I think like instinct and heuristics are things that, you know, we haven't really been leaning on very much in terms of adding so much vision to the game. It's like, oh, well, you only make a play because you have like complete information. And I think one of the beauties of this game is that you often have asymmetric information and you have to make the best play out of what you know or what you can intuit, right?
I definitely like that. And I think that if there are less wards, because there's going to be less vision now, then it does kind of, it's going to change matchups, you know, people's choices for matchups for laning a lot too. But I think it will also encourage, you know, more of the possibilities for those early game playmaking junglers. And for them for this role to get out of the, whatever you want to call it, for your second support or whatever, of playing mostly tank champions and playing down wards, you know, I feel like this will at least introduce some more versatility.
Yeah. I think generally speaking, in terms of like strategies, it's like, oh, let's say you picked, you know, Darius top, right? And he's like auto pushing. And it's like, oh, well, yeah, the first auto move for the enemy is to, you know, bring their jungler to gank him, right? And then your response to that is like, oh, maybe
I'm already here
I have the
counter
counter
ganking,
gank,
yeah.
right? And then, you know, like the counter to that is like, maybe I have the, you know, the Galio TP behind or whatever, you know, like these kinds of things. And it's like, I think those kinds of plays like will still exist in responses.
And I do kind of like that argument. I mean, I am always curious about how dark or how bright the map should be, because I played in like really early beta when wards didn't exist and you had nothing but like brush all over the map. And that was clearly not enough vision, right? Because people didn't even lane and you just have 4 people showing up in the bottom lane at a moment's notice and you'd be dead. And there was nothing you could intuit about that gank. It's like he's missing from mid lane. I have nothing to do.
Yeah.
But now it's like, and I think this is where control wards potentially kind of moved in the right direction where, okay, this is the limit of clearable vision you can have.
Yep.
We thought, right? But then I feel like when stuff like Sweeper gets into it, or the fact that you're buying like 3 control wards and constantly moving it around, or even having Duskblade, like there is a level of too much blackout. And I do feel like vision definitely power creeped with Zombie Ward in the fact that like the map is hacked again.
Yep.
But we hacked the map and didn't give power creep levels of vision clearing.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
Because if we still had Oracle's Elixir, like we did back in 2013, where you just pop a potion that cost a bunch of gold, run around and clear everything, right? It would be balanced, even if that's not ideal with how much time
It's
you
OP
put in.
versus OP.
I don't like an
right?
arms race of placing
I
and
agree.
clearing wards though,
I
because
agree.
then
I
you're
think that's
spending
too
your whole
much.
time chopping wards down.
Yeah.
So-
And his point is just that their arms race was one-sided, right? It's like the wards
Exactly.
dominated the vision control. The vision control country is now lost
because
completely.
even though we have caps on
slaves to
warding,
yeah, exactly. Slaves to the trackers then.
we have caps on warding. Zombie ward violates the cap. Blue wards violate the cap, right? And the vision, and also like even the Squire's Bloom or whatever violates that vision game a little bit. So I am fully on board right now with making players intuit a little bit more, because I know from talking with enough players and coaches that when there is enough vision, the only way you coach them to play and the way you learn to play is making plays around vision. And I love watching the best players that are super good and accurate at guessing based on, I saw this guy here 45 seconds ago. He didn't show up here. He should be here. Let's play around that.
And make timings matter again, right? And sure, it does somewhat in solo queue as far as, okay, maybe he could be top at 3 minutes, so I got to ward at 250 or whatever, right? Like these things matter a little, but it feels like it has moved so far away from that in pro play to just ward literally everything always and always see the jungler. And actually the thing that really hammered it home so much for me was one of the Blame games that Mark did recently. I was watching, and I think it was a really good one. And it was talking about Acadian and some of the blame that he had gotten for essentially like not creating early pressure or whatever it was. But it tracks the mini map. He's playing Kha'Zix, where he is on the map for however many minutes, 10, 15 minutes. He's basically always on a ward for like 15 minutes straight in his own jungle.
Yeah.
Like every camp is essentially warded. Jungler goes in topside, Tracker's Knifes 2 camps. Then they see him up there. So then the support and bot lane goes in bottom side, pre-wards his bottom side camps. Like there's this back and forth where they always know where he is. So they always know that's safe to invade and ward.
Right.
And it just snowballs it because there's not even like the threat of, if I go in there, maybe the Kha'Zix will kill me because they already know where he is.
That's an invisible champion, right? He's one who has an ultimate where he's
not invisible enough.
constantly
Kobe.
going invisible. You're like, God damn it.
Kobe's like, I can transition this into some requests for Kha'Zix buffs.
Did we campaign hard enough against Zombie Ward?
I actually want to move us along to top lane because that is going to be one of the lanes. Actually, that's the lane. I'm just going to say that's the lane that will feel vision changes the most to me because it's one of the long lanes. You're by yourself. They're always complaining about junglers, whether they're up there or not up there. Seems like you can't win with the top laners. But you guys did a bunch of top
You
lane
can win
changes.
with top laner. All you have to do is always come my lane, only ward for my lane, never take my CS,
Always
and give me all the
counter-gank.
kills.
Yeah.
Also, always counter gank.
Yeah.
And get me Rift Herald.
That's true.
And then you've won.
But yeah, there's Darius, Gangplank, Gnar, Ornn, Poppy, Renekton, Jax, Frozen Mallet, and a Press the Attack change all in this patch for top lane.
And this, I had touched on a little bit earlier as far as like actual top lane presence. When you're looking at the champions that are actually picked the most, it's a little bit different with the presence. But Gnar, 290 picks, GP, 233 picks, Ornn, 187 picks. Then the next highest is like Vlad and Camille at 129, 111, and then it drops way off from there, right? So immediately these champions that are getting hit are all some of the highest presence ones, which will, if not like opening up different diversity, like, strategic diversity, it will at least open up different champions, and there will be like a time of kind of changing things around.
Yeah. I mean, generally speaking for top lane, we want, in general, I would say like 2 main things. One, we want the play in the lane to be good and high quality. It shouldn't be like, hey, Ornn just pressed W and like negated literally everything that I did. And we also want like diversity of strategy. Like we want to see Camille and we want to see Gnar, and we also want to see tanks like Maokai, and we want to see some, Scion picks or, various poke lanes or some juggernauts to kill tanks and things like that. So, ultimately this patch is about kind of empowering those types of champions. So Renekton, obviously getting press the attack buff. Press the attack is more selfish on this patch. You, because of the way that the damage amp works, you're gonna proc it in bot lane, get the 12% damage amp at level 1, and your Leona's just gonna blast them, And so by reducing the amount of percent that you get at early levels, it can make it better for Renekton, and we can add some more power into the.
I like the change. It makes it more for top laners or junglers or whatever, whoever wants to use it more selfishly than the damage amp, and it still kind of gets there for the team.
Yeah.
And I know that last time we talked about top lane, that was one of the things was like, where's our fervor replacement?
Yeah.
And a lot of people were complaining about that. I also like the shout out to Hashinshin change here with the Jax Counter-Strike.
Through the Counter-Strike.
So,
Yeah.
Kobe,
It will no longer go.
The
right?
reason
It will no longer go right.
this actually made me happy to see, because the reason I was like, oh, he activated Counter-Strike late is because I've been so used to it having this wind up time that I was like, yes, it has to like be going already, and that's how I thought the skill was supposed to work or whatever.
I mean,
even though the visual thing was up, I had always just like thought of that as a thing.
Yeah.
But I like that it has actually been fixed here, and I have had Hashinshin on my friends list for like 5 years or whatever since season 1. So I want to message him and
did he complain to you?
And congratulate him. No, I haven't talked to him.
Congratulate him on
Congratulations.
I haven't talked to him.
Congratulations! It can never again go right through the Counter-Strike.
But I haven't messaged him in a long time. He actually, I'm not sure if he's still on there because I changed my name a lot.
Right.
I'm pretty sure he is, but like a lot of people have randomly removed me because I made my name like
Kobe is friends with
weird
famous
potato and stuff like that.
Yeah. Generally speaking, we're pretty inconsistent about like cast times and like actually
The visual matching up.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, we want.
Why is that?
Honestly, it's just legacy. Like it's pretty difficult to go through and change everything and make it consistent. Like there's a lot of animation work that needs to be done. Like generally when you press the button, like you should have this immediate animation response. You should have some noise, visual cue, audio cue, and it's like very. I would say it's very time consuming to go through and fix all of those, and there are higher value things that we could be doing.
Yeah, I remember there was a few stuff like that back when I was working on the game. Like, for instance, almost every spell in the game has a quarter-second like cast time, except then there's randomly a few spells that have a 0.15 second cast time, like Morgana's Dark Binding and Lux's Light Binding, and it's like, well, sure, we could change it, but now we're fundamentally changing the feel of Morgana's Binding, and it should be a responsive spell. So, like, it's actually good that it's that way, but it's different. And then you have a character like Cho'Gath, who actually has half-second cast times on a lot of his spells.
Yeah.
But it's because he's the giant dinosaur. Like, it feels like Cho'Gath. If he's snapping around these spells, right, feeling like Camille, it's actually bad for the game. So some of it is kind of champion-specific to make them feel like they're supposed to.
Right.
The GP and Gnar changes, I think, are actually pretty interesting to me because those champions have become so universal in pro play. And also specifically for Gnar, because Frozen Mallet, the slow got nerfed for range champions by 10%. So that's like core item getting nerfed, and he's not getting the scaling like return on cooldown from his ultimate. So basically how it was before is as you ranked up your ultimate, you got more cooldown reduction when you caught your boomerang for every rank up, and he no longer gets that. So I believe it stays at a flat 40 now instead of going up to 65, 66, something like that. So those two changes seem pretty big, and mana ones, I think a lot of people read and don't think they're a big deal, but GP's level 1 Q going from 40 mana to 60 or 65 is actually pretty insane to me because there is so much more of like a world in which you're actually just going to go now in lane and be forced to take bad backs, which base timing is so incredibly important in top lane, especially in a world in which you have less vision. The wave can get stacked and you can get dove, these sorts of things. Like if you cannot base on a Sheen and that sort of stuff, it starts to feel pretty scary. So like that actually I think affects the power of those champions a lot, and even maybe the build pass, right? Like maybe Manaflow Band is actually a must-have now.
Yeah, I actually really like this Gangplank nerf a lot because he still has the possibility of that late game power, right? But one of the most frustrating things for me is, especially in solo queue, if you're like, oh, I got a top lane autofill or something, and the enemy picks Gangplank, I would dodge that game every single time because
there's scale for free.
There's zero way that my top laner, if they're not like an expert in Camille or Gnar or something like that, is going to punish them early, and he's all guaranteed going to outscale, and then he's going to be team wiping.
And
us.
even with the Gnar thing, like people have found out these builds, with starting Resolve Secondary, Relic Shield with 3-pot. We're seeing some of the best GPs actually just go even in pro play.
So
with
everyone's blind picking him.
Yes,
there's like, I'm going to outscale you.
Yep. Yeah. And if you are that solo queue guy who's playing, there's certain matchups where it's like even if you are an expert, you actually don't get to do anything because he just presses Q on you on cooldown, farms gold off you.
Yeah.
So I'm actually pretty excited about this because mana being a resource that you can actually attack feels pretty impactful. And definitely there are, especially in combination with some of the aggressive champions being buffed. When I think of like a Renekton being buffed, right? Like press the attack being buffed, like that feels like, hey, there's more opportunities to actually all in and punish this guy in the early stages. Or even if you can't kill him, well, he should be behind enough gold that his passive doesn't just like, hey, he's down 20 CS, but he's up gold.
Yeah. Matt, I had a question. How familiar are you with the Kalista changes?
Pretty familiar.
I'm a little curious on this champion because this champion has been a menace for competitive to balance. Like it's either 100% pick ban or not. Also, I know design is really hesitant to change attack range. And this champion's already weird. Like she already only does 90% of her attack damage on auto attacks because like the rend is, the full damage ability.
Yep.
Now the attack range is shortened by 25 from 550 to 525. The base attack damage down, base attack speed is up, and then more base attack speed growth. But the Sentinel now gives attack damage, which, remember, isn't fully effective on auto attacks. Like, what are the goals of this change in particular to like get her into a balanceable state, it feels like?
Yeah, so actually for Kalista, I started doing this, and then I was like switching over to AP, and the first thing I was trying out was like knock-up duration on the ult, something that pros use readily more. We found that kind of biased her away from taking, Namis and Jannas. Like Namis and Jannas wouldn't want to throw themselves in when they only knock up for like 0.5 seconds because then they'll just instantly die kind of thing. And so we pretty much tried exploring attack range at that point, mainly because her lane is very safe and very strong in a lot of cases, and especially with the, like the rend harass for free kind of mana refund that you get when you stack the creep and then you hit them. And so we were like, oh, how can we introduce a weakness rather than just like making her weaker. Like, weak, right? Yeah. And so it's like, oh, well, actually maybe, when Spell Thief supports or when, all the sorcery ADs were in vogue, it was like, oh, Kalista didn't see as much play, right? Like in LCK or Kesper Cup, that was the patch when it was going on. So we're like, oh, maybe we can open her up to more, pokey kind of attrition lanes, and that would be a meaningful weakness for her. Okay. With regards to the W, we found that when we did all of these changes together, there was not really much incentive to take her in bot lane, and we saw solo lane Kalista actually having a lot of success, and we're like, ooh, not sure about that one. Like her lane is very, very strong when you are getting those, free rens, and like Lucian mid obviously is.
But I know
very
for
similar.
a fact Huni has played even way before us, like last year, lots of Kalista top by himself.
Exactly.
And he would bind that.
Man, you bind Udyr.
It's another way to be like, hey, jungler, come gank for me.
I actually remember, this is a while ago, we actually used to do a strategy when we were playing Flexion playtest with Matthias.
Yeah.
It was a Skarner guy,
you just
right?
throw that
And we'd
guy
actually just like sacrifice the lane a little bit to have this level 6 gank where Skarner comes down and he's linked with Kalista.
Yeah.
And we got kill with it like 100% of the time. It was actually hilarious.
Yeah. So we were mainly worried about that, and also it's kind of a thematic fit for her. Like she has her soulbound, thing, and so playing that up, but not having it be, this very jarring, hey, I have attack speed and now I can last hit properly, and then now I don't have attack speed and it feels really weird. So we chose AD instead, and
Cool. Yeah, we'll see kind of if it works.
Yeah,
right? I know Kalista's always a nightmare. One person who's also been a big nightmare is Zoe. There's been a few complaints
Here and there
about Zoe, whether or not, right, like her skill matters, whether or not she's good for the game, how is it not just old in Italy, but she got nerfed.
Certainly.
A little hard. I think, like, I don't necessarily even need to go into the nerfs because so many things got hit.
Yeah.
And I almost feel like the champion is dead. I'd like to know your opinion. Like, I guess, why do you think the balance team decided to hit Zoe now as opposed to like a month ago?
Yeah.
And why these nerfs?
So generally speaking, one thing that we like with new champions is the period of time where they sit and players get to innovate against them or innovate with them, right? You see this a lot in fighting games where it's like, you know, they just have the one game, they ship it in the box, it's on release, it never gets patched, and it's like, oh, okay, well, do they find counters to Fox in SSB Melee, right? Do people find counters to Zoe? Like, is Malzahar, like, good against Zoe? Or is, you know, like, can Galio weather her poke? Or, you know, are there champs that you can pick like LeBlanc or Fizz that can, you know, be good to gank her, right? And so kind of the approach we took with Zoe balance is like, yes, okay, obviously there are some things that are like very frustrating about the character, but at the same time, we want to be able to chip away at the things that we think aren't sustainable for the character long term, mainly like, you know, things like QQR or like her early wave shove. Obviously the 0.25 second meme, but like, you know, we did increase the cooldown by 1 second, which is pretty significant at early levels, and that was actually a pretty sizable nerf in terms of the metrics. Even though it didn't seem like it. And so ultimately it's like, you know, we want players to innovate. We want players to discover more forms of counterplay because, you know, kind of if we restrict League to just being counterplay of, you know, dodge the circle or dodge the whatever, like, it's a very
And do you
narrow
feel like
game.
that happened with Zoe here? Like, because it feels like the time is up and now just a bunch of nerfs hit.
I think ultimately we're like, hey, now's the time. Like, we've kind of had enough of, you know, seeing all these, you know, front page Reddit, you know,
So
one
you're
shot
saying
with
we
no
were
Q.
just not smart enough to come up with counters to Zoe.
Well, it's more like
Time's up.
You know,
Nerf her.
you know, it's like
The players are too dumb. Get nerfed.
I mean, maybe I mean, we're not geniuses, right? Like, I mean, like, I would say, like, generally as a design department, we're pretty smart, right? But, like, you know, we can't really be like, hey, this is going to be, you know, the counter and players are eventually going to figure it out. Like, players are teaching us as well, right? And so it's like, you know, if you play against Thresh and it's like, oh, Thresh Lantern is unbeatable, but then somehow you take, like, Alistar and you can, like, combo while the dude is traveling back. That's, like, a form of counterplay that, you know, no one's ever seen before, right? And it's like, maybe we could see that with Zoe. Maybe the blocking gameplay of the E into, you know, whatever.
You're thinking maybe that would become a thing where you can block it and people do it consistently.
Where's the lever though, as far as like, you know, room for developing this counterplay and room for there to be, you know, like balance versus frustration, right? Like one of the examples, like I always really liked playing Tahm Kench, right? And I remember this was probably 2 years ago now or something. Tahm Kench got like this huge round of nerfs and was literally sitting as the lowest win rate champion in every role that he played, and he was still the second most banned champion in the game, right? And that to me taught me one thing, that players care more about how annoying something is than how strong something is, right? And as a design team, like how much responsibility do you think that you guys have to actually keep that in mind? Because people are literally hurting their chances to win the game by banning Tahm Kench, but they're like, I would rather lose than see Tahm Kench eat none of my CC. And I feel like it's the same way against Zoe, because for me, my experiences playing against Zoe was not even that I was losing. It was more that I was so annoyed. Like, it's, you know, okay, great. I felt like I could play Cassidin and beat her in the 1v1. I felt like I could play Malzahar and beat her in the 1v1. I felt like I could dodge 99% of the Qs. But then that one hits you and you get one shot and you're like, I don't want to play anymore.
I mean, suddenly, like, I think some champs, like, get to the point where, hey, like, if you have a 15-0 Katarina, it's like, okay, well, she instantly kills you, right? And, I mean, we can allow for that, right? Like, if that only happens, like, 1% of the
I
game.
better be able to at least instantly kill one person.
Exactly.
If not multiple.
I mean, I think the problem with Zoe is that her kit, as we balanced it, was very focused into all your power is in the one shot. And so if all the power is in the one shot, then it's like, well, obviously you're going to get one shot sometimes, right? And I think a more sustainable thing for if players, if we want to, you know, kind of alleviate player frustrations in that case, is like, hey, give her, you know, more power in the things that are less, you know, frustrating to play against, but can still make her powerful and is satisfying. Like, there are a lot of things that we can improve on Zoe's kit in terms of, hey, this is a fun, satisfying portion of the kit that doesn't necessarily need to be one shot.
Yeah, I think it's a funny story I have here about Darius, because certainly T, the designer of Zoe, his first champion was Darius. It was also the first champion that I like balanced back when they did a different system of like having a balanced dude and the designer dude, and then you fought over what was OP and what wasn't.
Yeah.
And when we released Darius, he like never went over like 51% win rate, right? Like he was actually quote balanced when he released, but the way we did it is he was basically all about his resetting ultimate.
Yeah.
Right. So when he won, it was because he had 35 kills,
Yeah,
right? Because
sure.
and when he lost, he was useless, and people didn't remember those. But they just remembered the like 30 kill games. So I feel like perception wise, he was one of the like most busted champions possible when he released. And I think that was just an example of like knowing what you're going to bounce around and needing to recalibrate afterwards. Because
Exactly.
Darius clearly needed some power in his other abilities, so his baseline was better, and he didn't need to be about all these super extreme high moments.
Yeah.
And like we learned that later as it goes on, and it is definitely something that happens with champs. And I'm also glad that Zoe is nerfed now.
Yeah, I think I just want to.
Yeah,
I want to slip
too close.
Two summer
one
highs.
last champion to discuss here in parallel with Zoe because Rengar is getting renerfed. Excuse me, reverted.
Re-nerfed.
Not renerfed. Actually,
Definitely
Unreworked.
Back to the original queue, which I've talked to a lot of the challenger, like one-trick Rengars, to have them give me advice so I can use Rengar when he comes back out. But
Nice.
basically, the only question I have is Rengar going to be able to one-shot again with the Q, double Q, empowered Q combo?
I've
Can
heard all
one
that
shot
stuff.
now.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
it's certainly can one-shot right
this
now.
is literally like the only question that Rengar cares about is like, can I jump in and one-shot people?
Yep.
Whether it's with the Tiamat reset combo, there have been many different variations of the one-shot combos.
Yeah.
But can I do that? And what is the combo now?
I guess it depends on what you constitute as one shot, right? Like,
If I jump in with my ult and I can kill them within like
If I jump in and I go like this, do I kill them all when I press all my buttons?
two
I mean-
empowered Qs, I think usually does it.
I think,
because
yeah,
you
if-
can Tiamat reset, you can throw the E.
yeah, I
on
mean,
the-
certainly if you get two empowered Qs. One thing that August did with Rengar is he wanted to load more power. Like, I think the Rengar rework did a lot of good things in terms of, hey, you now have this closest target gameplay. You now have more variance in terms of which ferocity ability you want to cast. One thing he did put on here was the flat shred. And so this is kind of biasing more towards, hey, your follow-up cues are more impactful than the one that you actually jump out with. And so I would expect his time to kill to be still very short. But at the same time, there is some response to it. So yeah, I think you certainly can one-shot. And I think on live, like Rengar can one-shot as well. Pretty
You definitely can.
I mean, like I got one shot by Rengar yesterday, right? But it's like, well, like, I think ultimately it's like, oh, does this feel better for the Rengar player? And I think in terms of time to kill, it'll be relatively
Well, also
similar.
feeling about the same for playing against. I think that's kind of the
Exactly,
goal, right? Like
yeah.
if Rengar's going to be Rengar, you may as well have the Rengars being happy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you're gonna die in a one shot, it's like
For all the ones I talked to, like playing on beta, they were pretty happy with the rework. So
Yeah.
good job, I guess.
Yeah.
For their side.
Thanks for sticking around so long. I do want to move on to some Twitter questions that are patch related so we can all answer
nice.
it. Office Maxwell says, will the Darius buffs mean anything for him in pro play? And if not, in what scenario would Darius be playable in pros? Hashtag Dunkmaster for life. So the Darius buffs are obviously the press the attack change, but what
I
you
don't know
guys
if
also
would Darius take press or
Yeah, I
would he
don't-
take grasp? Or?
yeah, I mean,
Grasp, in my opinion, was better on live.
yeah,
but
his crippling strike is reduced in cooldown at early ranks. It also scales better with total attack damage, and then his apprehend has more armor penetration, 5% more at all ranks.
I don't think it really changes it unless something to do with the vision allows you to play more aggressive lanes. Like unless there's actually more of a meta shift, because I do think Darius had some pretty abusive matchups into tanks, but we weren't seeing I don't know. You have to. It's one of those champions that you have to play very aggressively. I feel like, which exposes you to jungle pressure. And in
Yeah.
pro play, when people are coordinated enough, they can punish that and shut down Darius. And Darius from behind is pretty trash. So, I think that's the thing that is still up in the air. The more likely change I think that could push him in is, okay, if there's not as much vision and you can maybe camp this person and dive them and do counter ganks and this sort of thing and play more heavily around that lane. I feel like the vision changes are more likely to put him in pro play than the actual champion changes.
Yeah, I would agree in terms of hey, Darius with his good matchups into tanks, because archetypically he's a Juggernaut, right? And Juggernauts are generally pretty good into tanks. If you are committed to playing your jungler around topside, I could see it definitely working. But as it is, his damage is also pretty unreliable, and he
Yeah.
team fights pretty poorly. So it's like I would imagine it doesn't
Push
change
also
much.
isn't even
for-
that good. So
Yeah.
it's like the payoff seems pretty low in pro play.
Yeah, I would imagine it doesn't.
I do find one random thing about Darius. Did you guys see the UFC fighter who made gold last night on Reddit? And he's like a Darius main.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was so funny how he's a Darius main, professional MMA fighter, and then also that documentary they made, Fight, with he was also a Darius main. So as far as delivering on the thematic of like strong dude who fights people, what champion will they play in game?
10
It
out
is
of 10.
so clearly Darius.
That's true.
Yeah. All right. Next sort of question. This will probably be the final one, unless you have something to add on Darius Kobe. All right. Can someone please explain to me? This is from @partialchange. Can someone please explain to me what a full tank Jax brings to the team? Seems like he should be almost ignorable without at least one damage item. Most likely Trinity Force.
He brings Tracker's knife.
I'm
He did.
I'm definitely against the full tank Jax. I feel like you have to have Trinity Force to at least have the threat that the champion is kind of built around. But I can see if you're getting super blasted in a game and all you're going to do is die anyway, then go full tank.
Yeah, I mean, Jax is a champ that lives and dies by his base damages, essentially. Like, his ult base damage for his, repetitive uptime damage is pretty high, and he gets, like, ridiculously tanky with his E and ult. I would say, like, he generally does take press the attack, right, for when he's played in jungle, even though he goes, like, Cinderhulk.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I can't imagine, like, hey, you took, like, Aftershock Jax or whatever, and it would be very good. But yeah, press the attack I think also contributes a lot in terms of like team damage amps. So
I think that the tank Jax is a fallback pattern.
yeah,
Never the goal.
Exactly.
Like even in pro play, you're trying to build a Trinity Force. If you fall behind, you're just going to go full tank anyway because you still want to be a stun bot. But that's pretty much how I see it.
And I mean, I'd even say as much as I was making a joke about the Tracker's knife thing, that's actually kind of why people were building full tank Jax. Like even seeing Dardoch and guys like that talking about Twitter, they're like kind of joking about, oh, players are talking about how little damage the Jax did. It's completely irrelevant because he's saying as a jungler, your goal is to build HP and ward everywhere, right? Yeah. And so you don't die when you go into ward everywhere, right? And that's literally what his goal was. So I think that's more why people were building that style. If people will actually change it up now that warding totem is gone, maybe so, right? Maybe you have to be able to win more of those duels, which may require a more aggressive build.
Yeah, man, big patch.
Big patch.
A very big patch.
Probably talked about half of it.
I like this is like an ongoing meme, but it's like we're always like, yeah, quick episode today,
Yeah.
right?
Today we were
Talk
not
about the patch.
Like, clip episode.
No,
Talk about the patch for 30 minutes. We're 80 minutes in.
yeah, the
80
patch,
minutes
the
in,
patch
so,
just
yeah, time
became
flies.
80 minutes
Yeah.
to dream. The patch became the whole episode.
Yeah, it's a huge patch.
You did
I
it,
mean,
Matt. Congratulations.
Nice.
Yeah, thank
Thanks,
you for
bro.
joining us.
I'm
What's your
proud of
Twitter
you.
handle again?
Nice.
What's your Riot name?
Fruxon.
That's a terrible name.
It's hey man, 8-year-old me, best me.
All right, that's you do you, man.
Well,
That's gonna-
maybe we'll have up a graphic so people can search him.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think there is a graphic at the start because there's like a number in there too. It's
Yeah.
not even all letters.
No, it's I
There's
mean
a
my
0, right?
Yeah, well, there's a 0 in my summoner name because I can't take the other one because it's like reserved or something.
Because someone else took it before you.
Well, no, it's because like when I made it my Riot name, like they reserved the original name, so I have to ask player support to like kind of change.
But it's important that people see his Twitter so they have
Yeah.
someone to flame for.
all right.
Yeah,
Flame me
exactly.
on it's PHROXZON.
All right, thanks, Matt. He did the AP items, also worked on the patch. That's going to do it for this episode of The Dive. Thank you again. We will be back next Wednesday. Actually talk about the NALCS probably a little bit more and maybe some extra thoughts on the patch. This
more
one
8-4, yeah.
was all about
More
the patch
8-4.
for sure. Remember, keep sending us Twitter questions at RiotKobe, at RiotChat, at RiotAzael. And to Matt, you can tweet whoever you want as long as you use the hashtag The Dive LOL. And NALCS starts this weekend. Countdown starts at 1:30 p.m. NALCS countdown, that is, on Saturday.
Sweet.